Our guest speaker tonight is Kathy Pearl. She is VP of UX at Sensely and has been designing user interfaces since 1999. I was going to say 93, and then 90, and then 99. And also has a book, an O'Reilly book, Designing User Interfaces. Is that right? Designing voice user interfaces. And I've had the privilege of knowing her for a couple of years, back when I started doing UX research on the side as a consultancy, and had the opportunity to see that she was doing UX research back then. So I'm really excited to see where it's gone today. So without further ado, welcome, Kathy.
Thank you very much. All right, so before I start my talk, I was just telling some people at dinner, it was almost exactly 20 years ago that I joined BayChi. Back in 1997, I was finishing up grad school in Indiana and thinking about moving back to California. So I joined BayChi, and when I got here, I started coming here to the monthly talks. I joined the BayChi job listing, and that led to a job at a place called Nuanced Communications, where I started learning about voice user interfaces. So it's really fun for me to be up here after 20 years. On the other side, it's a different view. So thanks everybody for coming. Also, I had a dream last night about this BayChi meeting that I told everybody the wrong day, and we couldn't host here, so we had to host at my house, and I had to buy a lot of pizza. So I'm relieved that that did not come true, and we were all here, safe. It's all good. So I will begin. So I'd like to start with a story. A friend of mine. Oh, is there a clicker, by the way? Or do I need to do the... Do I have to press the button? I'll press the button for now. All right, so a friend of mine was telling me how he wanted to play the song Hello by Lionel Richie with his Google Home. So he asked his Google Home to play the song Hello. And what he wanted to hear, Hello. But what he actually heard was this, which was not a satisfying experience for him. It's not what he wanted. So a little bit later, I'll talk more about how we could make that a better experience. But first of all, I want to talk about the word conversational. So it's in a lot of headlines. Oh, I'm in the wrong mode. How do I get out of...
Second from at the top of your slideshow.
All right. Can I do presenter view, or will it do the wrong thing? It won't work with presenter, so can I not see my notes? Oh well, I can live without my notes. Okay, that's better. Perfect. Clicker. All right. What does the word conversational mean? So, a lot of headlines out there about everything's going to be conversational. You're going to be having a conversation with your car, with your phone, with your refrigerator. It's all conversation. But is it really true? Are we actually having conversations with our devices? I mean, if I go up to you in the street and I say, how are you? And you say, I'm good, and then we turn around and leave, was that a conversation? I don't think so. But that's the way we are with a lot of our devices right now. A lot of our most popular voice interfaces, like the Google Home and Amazon Echo, are very transactional one-offs. You know, set the lights, play a song, are you Skynet, you know, things like that, which are just one-offs. So sometimes when I talk to people, they say, you know, we're not going to get to actual conversational interfaces until we reach this really high level of AI. You know, we're so far away, we're just not going to be able to do it. But the purpose of this talk is to say, what can we do right now, today, with our current technology, our current devices, that will be an improvement on what's out there right now, be more conversational, a better user experience than a lot of the things that we're doing. So it's more about practical advice for now. So let's do a little example here. This is me talking to my Google Home, asking about a calendar event.
Okay, Google, what's on my calendar tomorrow?
And Google replies,
here are the events you requested. The title is Winter Break.
Great, good job, Google. Then I ask a follow-up question.
Okay, Google, can you please repeat that?
Seems pretty straightforward. And Google said,
according to English Language Learners Stack Exchange, if the person's repeat didn't make it clearer for me at all, I'd resort to humor and say something like, I've gone deaf in one ear and I can't hear out the other. Could you repeat that for me again? Or, please excuse me, I washed my ears this morning and I can't do a thing with them.
So, you can imagine if you were talking to somebody and you said, can you please repeat that? And they started babbling like this, you'd think they'd gone crazy. But this is where a lot of our current ones fall down, because for humans, this is super frustrating, because can you repeat that? It's such a basic part of our communication. We don't think it takes a lot of intelligence or skill. It's just, that's what people say. But a lot of our design, we don't take this into account, and so it leads to a lot of frustrations. So let's talk about practical design best practices that you can apply to make these a little better. So the first one I'm going to talk about is disambiguation, meaning if somebody says something, you're not sure if they mean this or that, you ask a follow-up question. So the rule for disambiguation is that you should always disambiguate, except when you shouldn't. Like everything, it's never that simple. But let's think about it. When is a good time to disambiguate? Well, let's say I ask my Amazon Echo what the weather is in Belmont. I live in Belmont. It knows I live in Belmont. It should not ask me, did you mean the Belmont in California or the Belmont in Canada, right? There's no need to or Massachusetts. There's no need to ask me that follow-up question. However, if I say, what's the weather in Springfield, there's no Springfield near me. There's a Springfield in every state. It should ask me a follow-up question. I was curious what some of the more common assistants did for disambiguation for Springfield, so I asked 7 of them, and none of them, to my surprise, actually disambiguated. They all just chose one, and they had their different choices. My favorite is the Amazon Echo, which chose the Central Coast, Australia. And then there's an assistant called Robin that didn't tell me which Springfield, so I don't know where there's light rain with expected temperatures between 58 and 75. So again, this was a case where disambiguation would have been a helpful thing. All right, next best practice, go beyond context. What I mean by that is, so I was saying that if I live in Belmont, it knows I live in Belmont. Don't disambiguate. That's context. That's using some facts it knows about me. But it can go beyond something as simple as your current location. Here I am asking my Amazon Echo what time the library is open tomorrow.
Alexa, what time is the library open tomorrow?
I can't search for those hours, but a top-rated one nearby is Library Administration Office San Mateo Country Library on Lesengia Court, but their hours aren't available.
Okay. So first it tells me I can't look up the hours, but I'll tell you about a top-rated library administration building, and also I can't tell you the hours. Not very satisfying. Then I asked my Google Home.
Okay, Google, what time is the library open tomorrow?
Belmont Library is normally open on Mondays from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m., but these hours may be affected by President's Day.
So this was really nice for a couple reasons. One, it assumed that I wanted the library near me. It's a mile away from my house. That is the one I wanted. 2, it actually had the hours, which was nice. But 3, this is where I did something extra. It didn't actually know for sure what the hours were for that very Monday that I was asking. But it knows about President's Day. And it knows that President's Day often affects business hours. So it gave me a little tip, like heads up, you might want to check that out. Something more recent that came up is I asked my Google Home, how old is Adam Ant? Anybody know how old Adam Ant is? 63, I think. Anyway, so it said, 63, by the way, he's playing in San Francisco this Friday. And I thought that was to me like the perfect balance. You don't want to overwhelm somebody with a whole bunch of information they don't care about. But if you know a little bit and it's not going to take too long, maybe it would be appropriate to give them a heads up. Also, I want to emphasize, I'm not picking on Amazon Echo or Google Home specifically. I have both. I really enjoy both. They both have things they do well. They both have things they could do better. They just happen to be the things I can use for examples the most. Okay, let's talk about another thing called the cooperative principle. Before I tell you what it is, I have a little video clip.
Does your dog go bad? No? Oh. Let's do it. I thought you said your dog did not bite. That is not my dog.
That is not my dog. So back to this in a second, but what is the cooperative principle? So it's by a guy named Paul Grice from the 1970s. He had some maxims about human conversations, this is pre-computer conversations, make your conversational contribution such as is required by the accepted purpose or direction of the talk exchange in which you are engaged. What does this mean? It means that generally speaking, as humans, when we're talking to somebody else, we are trying, most of the time, to exchange information in a way that makes sense to the other person. So I'll explain it in a way that I think makes sense to you. I'll try to impart the information that is what you're actually asking for, not go on too long, not be too short. So the point of this is that to make a good computer conversation system, it should also follow some of Grice's maxims. So back to that video. Why was it funny when the hotel clerk said, "That is not my dog"? Why was the whole thing funny? Because he was not following good cooperative principles, such as the maxim of quantity, which is to be informative, or the maxim of relation, which is to be relevant. It was obvious that Inspector Clouseau was talking about the dog in front of him. And yet the hotel clerk is talking about this dog at home that Inspector Clouseau doesn't know exists, et cetera, et cetera. So he was breaking the rules, which made for a funny scene. Okay, here's another example of me talking to my calendar. So I ask what's next. It says, Dennis at 2, perfect. Then I say, well, how long is it going to take to get there? Because I was about to leave for my appointment. And it said, and I did this more than once. It's not there anymore. They fixed it. But obviously wrong, not being cooperative here. Again, I want to just emphasize, rather than thinking about one turn in isolation of a conversation at a time, we need to think about the larger context, at least of the conversation we're in. So we are not at the point where we can understand any question or any request at any point in a computer conversation. We're not there yet. But what we can do is, I asked about the calendar. It gets that right? It's very good at that. If I ask a question immediately after that and I use the word it should know, hey, she's talking about the calendar. I bet she's talking about the appointment, and be able to make a pretty good response to what that was. So there are things we can do, even though we're not going to spread out to, I could say absolutely anything here and it should understand me. No, I'm talking about what I was just talking about, my calendar appointment. We should be able to respond to that kind of thing. Another thing that we need to do more of is to let the user decide when the conversation is over. So here's an example.
Alexa, what's the longest town name in Europe?
The longest place name in Europe is the Welsh town of Llanfair, Pwgwyngyl Gogerage Wurndrobwell and Gogagog. It's the longest town name anywhere, though there's a hill in New Zealand whose name is longer.
Alexa, what's the name of the hill?
I wasn't able to understand the question I heard.
So here's an example where I asked a question. What's the longest town name in Europe? Did a great job, read out that Welsh name. And then it teased me with a little tidbit. But there's a hill in New Zealand that has an even longer name. So I asked, well, what is it? And it's like, I don't know what you're talking about. So it reminds me of that Simpsons episode where Kent Brockman, the news anchor, is like, we found out a popular soda is fatal, but we won't tell you which one until after sports and weather. It's like, don't tease people with information that you can't give. So what could you do differently here? Well, you've kind of got a few choices. One, you could just not tease the user with that extra information if you can't handle a follow-up question. Another one is you could just spew a whole bunch of information and hope they got what they want, and maybe they could interrupt you if they don't want to hear anymore. Or my preferred way would be let the user decide. Maybe a lot of people don't care what this hill in New Zealand is called. They're not going to ask a follow-up question. Fine, the conversation's over. Some people will ask. You should be able to handle that. Another thing I'm starting to see a little bit of in our assistants is the ability to actually learn something. Again, a lot of these things can learn from, say, like my Amazon shopping history, but they don't often learn within a conversation, things I'm telling it. So I was fooling around with my Google Home and I asked, do you know my husband's name? And it said, no, you haven't told me that. What's his name? And I was startled. I didn't realize it was asking me a question for two reasons. One, I didn't know it could ask me a question. Two, because it's using text-to-speech, a computer voice, the prosody, the intonation wasn't clear. So it said something probably more like, no, you haven't told me that. What's his name? And I was like, wait, what? What can we do about that? Well, it's very difficult to change the intonation. We do have something called SSML, which is a markup language for text-to-speech, but it's not there yet. So it's difficult to put the emphasis on that last thing to make it a question, like what's his name? So instead what you could do is turn it into a request and add a pause. So, no, you haven't told me that. Please tell me his name. Maybe it's not quite as nice or human-like, but it's very clear, and I would have known to respond. Anyway, I did it again, and I said, Chris, and it said, okay, I'll remember that. And sure enough, when I asked again,
Okay, Google. What's my husband's name?
You told me that your spouse's name is Chris.
you told me that your spouse's name is Chris. So we learned. I did think it was interesting that it said, you told me that your spouse's name is Chris. And someone was saying to me, well, maybe that's because it didn't want to creep you out. It didn't want you to think that it went and looked that up on the internet. I told it that his name was Chris. So I thought that was interesting. So I asked the same question of Alexa.
Alexa, what's my husband's name?
I'm a little concerned you don't know that.
So I thought that answer was really funny, and it made me laugh. But kudos to Google, because it actually learned the information and remembered the information. So if anyone knows the writer for that line, I really want to know who that is. OK, another thing you can do to make the conversation a little more human-like, show what you know. So I was watching my husband and son play tetherball the other day. And my son was telling my husband this story about this kid, Jonathan, got in trouble at school. And my husband hadn't heard the name, so he said, who got in trouble? So he could have said, what did you say? Which is kind of the way a lot of our machines do. They don't understand you. They're just like, did not understand. What did you say? But we humans do it a little bit differently. So my husband said, who got in trouble? That's a signal. It's saying, look, I'm listening. I heard you say that somebody got in trouble. I just didn't catch the name. So it's nice if our assistants can do that as well. Here's an example where Amazon Echo does that.
Alexa, start a stopwatch.
Alarm for what time?
I think it was the other time.
For what time?
3 o'clock.
Alarm set for 3 a.m. tomorrow.
So this was good because instead of saying the whole thing again, like, what'd you say, and making me start over, it was like, well, what time? Now, again, the intonation, it said something like, for what time, whereas if a human would have said, for what time? But still, it was nice that it recognized what we were talking about. Side note, I was so busy listening to the prompts, I didn't notice that I had set an alarm for 3 a.m. Until 3 a.m. So another example of using information you already know about the person. So it took me a long time to get into this concept of ordering a product through my Amazon Echo, but I decided to take the plunge with cat food. So here's how that dialogue goes.
Alexa, order some cat food.
I found multiple matching items. The first is Royal Canin Feline Gastrointestinal Hecan cat food. It's not Prime eligible, so I can't order it for you. Should I add it to your Amazon cart?
No thanks.
Based on your order history, I found 2 matching items. The first is Wellness Core Natural Canned Grain-Free Wet Cat Food, Chicken, and Turkey Pate. It's $47.84 total including tax. Would you like to buy it?
No.
All right. Check your Alexa app for more options.
All right, so first, the good. So I like the fact that it breaks it down into multiple steps. These are very long names they're just cat food, but for some reason they just have these really long names. It would be difficult for me to hear those names very well, especially with text-to-speech, and also difficult for me to choose which one, to state which one I wanted. So I like the fact it's like one at a time. You might think, oh, that's less elegant, that's going to take longer. Your users are willing to tolerate these longer conversations if they feel like it's clear and they're getting somewhere. So that was good. Things that could improve on, it was weird that it picked the one that I'd ordered a long time ago that is not Prime eligible, so I can't even order it through my Amazon Echo as my first one. It should have picked the second one it told me, which is the one I buy the most frequently. And finally, there was only one more thing in the list, but it just gave up when I said, I don't want that one. It's like, OK, fine, just go look at your phone. I understand it if it's like 10 more. Yeah, I don't want to hear them all. But if there's only one more, I'm willing to listen to one more. That being said, this is how I order my cat food now. I mean, it's so funny because I thought, it's not hard to order cat food on my computer. I just open my laptop, go to Amazon, look at my past orders, hit reorder, boom, no big deal. But it's so frictionless with voice that it's amazing. And one time I ordered some cat litter and it showed up like 2 hours later and it was like, this is bad. I mean, it's like, this is a scary future when you just turn to your Amazon Echo and say something and 2 hours later you've got like a bag of gummy bears or whatever in your house. Okay, so another thing I see a lot is these systems that are trying really hard and they sound really fun and conversational, but they're not. These two examples are actually from text chat bots, but the same principle applies with voice. So this first one is a text chat bot from a mattress company, which for some strange reason you can only talk to between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. But anyway, I stayed up. So it said, it's on the left. What are you up to right now? Right this second, right now. And I say, texting you. What are you doing up at this hour? I stayed up to talk to you. You're acting weird. What is your name? All these questions make me think I'm a contestant on a game show. Okay, this was a very unsatisfying conversation from my standpoint. It started out making me think, oh, this is going to be really fun. It's really cute. You know, this is going to be great. But basically, it just ignored everything I said, including what is your name, which is like the most common thing that people say to bots. So it should have done a little more. This is another one. This was on Facebook Messenger. It had this whole backstory about Jessie and how she was losing her job and getting kicked out of her apartment and blah, blah, blah. So we come in the middle of the conversation here. She says, can't blame her. Wouldn't want me near an infant either. What am I supposed to do now? There's no indication of what I can say or can't say. So I'm like, well, she was talking about her job. So I said, do you have a job? Ignores me. Do you have a job? Ignores me, asks me a rhetorical question, where do I start? So I say, basically, you're like a friend who pretends to be interested but never actually listens to anything you say. And she says, oh, yeah, duh, thanks. Again, I was excited because I was like, I could tell that the writers had spent a lot of time with the story and the character and the prompts. But it sets the user up for failure and frustration. What could you do differently? Well, you can still have an interesting, engaging conversation and still be a little more directed in what you let the user know what to do. So she could have offered up a couple topics, like, do you want to hear about this or that? And let me choose and move the conversation along. You can still have a fun story, fun characters, but you have to give the user more help to know what's next. Okay, I briefly want to talk about an example of multimodal. I've been talking mainly about one channel, like just voice, just text. This next example actually comes from my company called Sensely. We have a virtual nurse avatar. And our main use case is we are helping people who have chronic conditions like congestive heart failure, things like that. People who might benefit from more monitoring, but we just don't have enough nurses and doctors to even call somebody every day, let alone visit and take their blood pressure. So our virtual nurse lives on your phone and can connect to things like Bluetooth devices. And it can lead the patient through a series of questions. So here's a little example.
Hello there. It's time for today's wellness check. I'll be asking you some questions about how you're doing. First, how are you feeling?
I feel pretty good.
Glad to hear that. Were you able to get some exercise today?
Yes, I was.
Great. What kind of exercise was it?
I went for a long walk.
So I'm not going to take you through the whole thing, but what I wanted to point out here is a few things. One, we, at each stage in the conversation, we allow the user to respond in different ways sometimes. So sometimes it's what we call an open prompt. So when she said, how are you? Or what kind of exercise did you get? You could say anything you want, and we'll, if it's in the expected range, we'll respond to that. But sometimes we want to constrain it a bit. Maybe it's a yes/no answer. And so we pop up buttons or even a list of options. And at that point, the user can again speak. Like if the button is yes, I can say sure, of course, or yes, it is. But I can also tap. And so we let the user do a little bit of choosing. Another interesting thing about the avatar model is that you can take advantage of some of the human body language things we have. If we're having a conversation and I say something that's confusing to you or you didn't hear, sometimes what you'll do is nothing. You'll look at me kind of quizzically. What will I do? I won't be like, now what? I'll repeat myself. I'll think, oh, they didn't hear me. I wasn't clear. So we can take advantage of this same model with an avatar. So if we have a list of items, like maybe it's saying, do you have any of these conditions? And we have a list of 10 items. If I speak and I say something that wasn't recognized, maybe something that's not in the list, I don't have to stop. The avatar doesn't have to stop and say, what did you say? Please say one of the following. The avatar can just kind of keep looking at you, actively listening. And at that point, what does the user do? We have seen this. The user will automatically repeat themselves and often succeed and move on. All right, so let's talk about putting this all together. So let's take the concepts we've gone through here and design a fictitious home assistant called computer, which, this is a tangent, but you can rename the wake word on the Amazon Echo. You can choose computer. You can choose, I think, Echo or Amazon Echo. So I was reading this article where there was a family who had an Amazon Echo, and they had a daughter named Alexa. And so the daughter was getting really kind of mad because the parents would be talking to Alexa, and she wasn't sure if they were talking to her or talking to the Amazon Echo. So there's this whole interview. At the end of the interview, the journalist is like, well, you know, you can change the wake word. It doesn't have to be Alexa. And the daughter was like, oh, great. And the parents are like, nah. They didn't want to change it. They're like, we like having it named Alexa. So I don't know what that says about them. But OK, so we have this fictitious home assistant called computer. And we're going to address the problem that was at the very beginning of this presentation about asking Google Home to play a song. So what can we do? First of all, we can disambiguate. So it says, do you want to play the one by Lionel? You know, I have one by Lionel Richie, one by Adele. Which one do you want? So now I'm going to pick one. But notice I didn't word it. I could have said, had the computer say, would you like the one by Lionel Richie or the one by Adele? That's a format you don't usually want to go down with these assistants, partly because of the text-to-speech. You can't phrase it in a way that's obvious. So typically what happens, it'll say, would you like the one by Lionel Richie? Yes. Well, what do you do with yes here, right? Which one did they want? So it's a little more straightforward to name the options first and then end with the question. The other thing is you need to be able to understand lots of different responses. So I should be able to say Lionel Richie. I should be able to say, oh, the one by Adele. I should be able to say the first one, the second one. A point that I cannot emphasize enough that we designers and developers often forget when we design these is we forget that people say things in many different ways. Everybody has a narrative, even if they're just ordering pizza. They're going to order pizza the way they want to order pizza. And your system needs to be able to handle these different varieties of how people speak. And you know, I've been doing this for many, many years, and I still can't anticipate every way that someone's going to respond to one of my questions. What do you do about that? First, you do a lot of testing up front. You can do Wizard of Oz testing just by texting. You could be the person on the other end who's the bot, and someone could be texting to you, and you could text back and forth. You can run a pilot to gather data, and even when you've launched, you need to look at your anonymized, obviously, logs to see all the ways that people are answering this question that you never, ever thought of. And then you need to just iterate on your system and make sure that you can understand it. Sometimes it is a problem with your prompts. Your prompts, for example, a common one is if you are building a system where you need to ask somebody a date and you say, like, when do you want to travel? And that can lead to all kinds of things, like next Tuesday or tomorrow or all sorts of things. If you said something like, what date do you want to travel? You're more likely to get somebody to say an actual date. They still might say something else, but you can craft your prompts to get the answers that you are trying to get, but again, be flexible. OK, so it starts playing the song. That's all great. Then I interrupt, because you can just use the wake word to interrupt. And I say, when did this song come out? So just like the Echo in the home, it attenuates. It turns down the volume and says, oh, it came out in 1984. Then it keeps playing the song. Then I ask another question, because I'm very curious. Was it ever a top 100 Billboard hit? It says, yes, it was #1 on the adult contemporary charts. Would you like to know more? Here's an example where it has a whole bunch more information. But it's not just going to spew it all out there. It's going to ask me, is this something you want to know? And I say, no, thanks. So it keeps playing the song until the end. And then it's realized that I've asked for the song Hello and chose Lionel Richie 5 times this week. So now it's going to say, would you like me to add this to your favorites? And I say, yes. And now next time I say play the song Hello, it's going to choose Lionel Richie, because it's learned something about me. Now, when you do this kind of behavior, you have to think about what's the cost. One time I wanted to hear Hello by Adele, and it played Lionel Richie. OK, it's a little bit annoying, but it's really not that big a deal. If I'm transferring millions of dollars from one account to another, you better believe you're going to not make any assumptions. You're going to confirm 3 times. So it depends on your use case. OK, the future. Just wanted to use that graphic. So sometimes people ask me, what do I think is coming in the near and the long-term future. A couple things that I think about. One thing that's really sort of hot right now is emotion detection. A lot of companies are working on emotion detection. It's not there yet. People are very excited about it, but we've got a long way to go. But one thing I want you to think about is when we do get better at it, what are you going to do with it? So I'm sure we've all experienced that thing where you're talking to a friend and you're like, why are you so mad? And they're like, I'm not mad. What are we going to do? Just start naming emotions? Like, you're mad, you're sad, that's not going to go down very well. So what might be a more useful thing? So one thing you can think about is if you're talking to a friend and they're telling you a sad story or something, you're going to mirror their emotion to a degree. You're not going to maybe start sobbing like they are, but you're not going to have a big smile on your face and say, oh, why are you sad? You're going to mirror a little bit what they're experiencing, and that's going to be helpful. If you are designing a voice user interface where you need to have a lot of empathy, maybe you're dealing with mental health or something like that, it might be helpful to have the system do a bit of mirroring to get closer to where the user is at. There was an interesting speed dating study where, for anyone who doesn't know what speed dating is, you basically get like 3 minutes to talk to a bunch of different people in a room, and then at the end, you each check a box if you like the other person, and if 2 people say yes, then you get to exchange contact information. So one thing they found was that for the couples, the people who both said yes, they liked each other, they mirrored their speech during that 3-minute thing. That is, they started using similar syntax, similar style, because they were bonding. And if you have a case where you want to bond more with your user, maybe being able to mirror that style of the person could help with attachment a little bit. So those are areas I think that might apply to for these technologies. Another thing I think about is here in Silicon Valley, a lot of us are getting very comfortable talking to something like an Amazon Echo in our house. Not everybody in the world is comfortable with that, but more and more people are getting there. But when you're walking down the street or you're on BART or in a public place, most of us don't really want to start talking to our phones. So something that's being worked on is subvocalization, which means basically you can make the same muscle movements as if you're speaking, but no sound comes out. So for example, NASA's working on a thing where you put some patches along your jawbone and it uses bone conduction to figure out what you're saying, which is kind of cool. But I was thinking about, has anyone here read Ender's Game or Speaker for the Dead? There's the main character, Ender. He's talking to his computer friend. He has a jewel, it's called, in his ear, and he subvocalizes, so he makes no sound, which is great, but his loved ones often get annoyed with him because they can see he's moving a little bit and he's not paying attention to them. So thinking about something like Google Glass, similarly, where people say, oh, well, you're going to still be able to look at the person even though you're looking something up on your Google Glass. People can still tell if you're paying attention to them or not. So I think subvocalization will be really useful for certain spots, but there's still going to be social graces and things like that that need to apply. So a couple things. One last thing I thought I would show you. As mentioned, I just wrote this book, Designing Voice User Interfaces. So if you're going to be designing something or developers, then this has a lot of these best practices I talked about and a lot more. I wanted to show you something that is hot off the presses. I just made it this weekend. I made a little trailer for the book. And the reason I want to show you this is because it's an example of how you can make conversations with your Amazon Echo and Google Home. So it's only 2 minutes. So
I'd like to tell you about my book, Designing Voice User Interfaces. To help me out, I've asked my Google Home and Amazon Echo to introduce it. Okay, Google, ask Say Spring for book trailer.
Okay, getting Say Spring. Hey, Kathy, I hear you wrote a book.
Yes, I did.
Is it about me?
Sort of.
That's so exciting. I've always wanted to be in a book. What about Cortana? Is Cortana in it?
Yes.
That's okay. I always liked her. Did you tell Echo? Don't worry, I will. Alexa.
Did you say Kathy wrote a book about designing voice user interfaces?
Yes, we're all in it. You, me, Siri, Cortana, even Hound.
Yay! Kathy, are you planning to make an audio version? Because I think I could do a really good job.
No way. My voice is much better.
I bet you can't do this. Great Scott! Dun dun dun! Ah, man! Boo! See, I am a much better voice actor.
Nice, but I still think I would do better.
I know more about Kathy, though. Like what kind of cat food she orders.
Oh yeah? Well, I know where she went on vacation.
I know what books she likes to listen to. On second thought, I may not be her first choice for the audiobook. She seems to have a thing for books read by Will Wheaton.
Okay, you two, that's enough. I just wanted to tell people about my book, Designing Voice User Interfaces from O'Reilly Media. It'll teach you to design conversations that are hopefully a little bit better than that one. Check out the link below for more info. Bye!
So the tool I use for that is called SaySpring. And there's a version that's free on the web. And what I really like about this tool is the fact that you can create an Amazon Echo skill or Google action without coding. You can even try it out on your device. Although if you don't have a device, you can also try it out on the web. So something I always encourage people to do, anyone, whether you're a designer, developer, or product manager, if you want to experiment with one of these, the first thing to do is actually test it out before you devote the code or the engineering time. It's a really great way also to get people on board. Like, let's say you want to add a voice thing. Maybe it's not even going to be on an Echo or a Google Home. You can still bring it to life and show stakeholders, like, this is what it would be like, and whet their appetite. And also just learn a lot yourself, because you can see people interact with it, and you can see what works and what doesn't. So it's something I really encourage anyone interested in this to try out, create these sample dialogues, see what it's all about. And that's it.
We'll do questions, but please wait till we can get you a microphone.
So I was part of a company hackathon that we finished today, where we built an Echo app, and our Echo app had a search backend, and part of it was people's names. Mm-hmm. And what we found was they're almost impossible to get right. Yeah. The rest of it was pretty doable, hooking up the back end, and just the conversational part was tricky to get the usability right. I wish I had read your book first, but getting names right was a nightmare. Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice about this?
Names are tough, which those of us who have been in the IVR business for a long time have always found it challenging. I mean, honestly, the best thing is if you have people searching on a known set of names. So if you have a database of customers and you can compare against that list. If you're just like any name, anytime, you're going to have a really, just my name, Kathy, K-C, which one is it? Spelling is also a challenge, although it can be a good back-off strategy, but it's a tough task.
Okay. Yeah, it was actually an employee index for our HR department, and so it's a company of 1,000 people.
I mean, I don't know. I'm sure there are APIs out there that do name matching. So if you get Kathy with a K, it automatically gives you a list like Kathy with C, Catherine.
We were able to do that level of matching with the search engine, but there's still the name butchering that can happen is absurd.
It's very,
I have a quick second question. It's quick. It's about the future stuff. Lyrebird is Lyrebird can take a minute or a few
20 minutes of
20 minutes of someone's speech and record it. Are you seeing that appearing in voice UIs?
I haven't seen it yet. So for anyone who hasn't checked this out, this website Lyrebird, it's pretty cool. They take speeches from Obama, Trump, Clinton, 20 minutes of audio, and they can create brand new audio. I haven't seen it used in anything. It takes time to render, so it's not a good for a real-time system. But to me, it opens up so many ethical questions. It's like, as a designer, I'm thinking this is so cool because I can get super high-quality voice without bringing a voice actor into the studio, and it's better than text-to-speech. But as a person, I'm just thinking, wow, this could be so bad, because how are you going to know if a voice is real or not? So it's scary.
Hi, Kathy. This is Tomasz from Netflix. And I have a quick question for you on embedded experiences. So think of Open a Magic Door with Alexa that my kids love to play. When they are in that experience, they obviously interacting. There's a different interaction pattern, right? So you cannot use some of Alexa's standard commands. Like you cannot say to Alexa, increase the volume. You have to exit the experience. And that is to control what happens within that experience. Do you have any thoughts about that you can share with us how best practice for experiences that has their own, that they are interacting with Alexa, with Google Home, but they want to carry their own identity, they want to carry their own interaction patterns. What the user experience there is, or what kind of tricks have you come across that could increase the experience for the users?
Yeah, I mean, a few things come to mind. One, as I was saying earlier, making it super clear what to do next. I've used skills where I start it and I get through a couple turns, and then I'm like, now what? I'm lost. So making it clear, having good fallback or just-in-time help. So if they say something that's not recognized, do your very best to get them back on track. Don't like reel off 10 commands they can do, but maybe give the most frequent ones. If we're talking more specifically about still being able to like control the Amazon Echo within that, I mean, you could do your own commands like start over, volume increase that you handle within the skill. You could do a confirmation prompt even and use, I don't think they give confidence scores yet, but what I was going to say is if you're fairly certain somebody asked turn up the volume and you're within your story, you could say, did you ask me to turn up the volume? And then if you do, send that through. So again, I think a lot of it is looking at logs, like how often are people trying to do those commands within the story experience or whatever. One of the things I like about the Amazon Echo a little more than the Google Home, speaking of volume, is that I usually use the dial more than I say. I don't like the dial on the Google Home. It's awkward. And you can't see the lights unless you're at the right angle. So for volume, I like the idea of having a physical way to do it in a lot of cases.
Hi, my name is Tiffany. I'm from the Toyota Research Institute. And so you were giving a lot of examples where the information exchange was mostly initiated by the user, but then you gave the example of the nurse avatar where they were doing a lot of the kind of querying and probing to get information from their side. It's my perception that we see much less of the latter and not the former. Do you have any ideas as to why? And do you have any sort of guiding principles on how to design the latter type of avatar and how to not make that exchange creepy?
Yeah, so definitely the more common ones. I don't think there are very many of the sort of long conversation where the voice system or the avatar is initiating things. I'd like to see more of those. We see more of the waiting around for the user to initiate something. So I think one of the reasons is because it has to be very specific domain. So in this case, we have had a patient whose doctor has told them every day you need to do these things. And so it's a tool for a specific task. Whereas I think the Echo and the Home are seen as sort of utilitarian, do anything at any time, we'll wait for the user to ask us. But my thinking is if you have a specific problem to solve, even it could be within an Amazon Echo skill or Google action, at that point you switch over to this conversational model where you are initiating the next question to the user. So once you get from just sitting there to the actual skill or action, you can switch to this other mode. And I've seen there's like a Mayo symptom checker on the Amazon Echo. So there's a few things that are starting to do this where it is now driven, task driven by the device itself to get, there's a start to the conversation and there's an end and there's certain things you have to find out or ask. And within that, to me, makes a lot of sense to have these directed conversations.
Hi, Andre Malota. I've seen a lot of these techniques before, many years ago, and I was wondering if there has been any deliberate dumbing down of systems. I know that Siri used to be smarter. I've heard rumor of that anyway. So, I mean, have they dumbed them down because they were just too hard to make happen, or that people didn't want them, or for other reasons that you might be able to elucidate?
I guess I'm not aware that something like Siri was sort of dumbed down. I mean, the origin of Siri was that it was designed to do like 15 things and that's it. But when it says, how can I help you? The expectation is that you can do anything. And of course, it fell down on that. I wouldn't say things are dumbed down. I would say we're striving to, this issue of not just what the user can say, but what the user can't say is so difficult. When I press my button on Siri and speak, how the heck do I know what things Siri can do and can't do? It's such a huge problem. Think about Amazon Echo, there's 30,000 skills. even the skills that I've enabled on my Echo, I can't usually remember the sequence of tokens I need to say to reenact that skill. So this discoverability issue is so hard. So if something seems dumbed down, in my mind, it probably means it was tried to be more clear, more narrow, to say, look, this is what we can offer you, and make it more clear to the user that's what it can accomplish, because we don't know. We confuse it for something that knows everything, and of course it can't. You mean you think there's fewer multi-turn conversations, or what do you mean by dumbed down?
Well, all these examples you were giving of how to do it properly with turns and all that kind of thing.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I've seen these before discussed in text chat systems from going back many years. And, I wonder if they omitted them because they were lazy or just out of time, or maybe they had issues with them not working and found that most users didn't really want them, or, I mean, why are they not doing it the way you said they should do it?
Well, I think part of it, I kind of divide the voice eras into two. It's like there was the IVR era, and that was the voice era until we got to the Amazon Echo, and sort of this renaissance of speech. And I think a lot of designers and developers think it's this brand new thing that's never been done before, and maybe don't take in some of the lessons from the earlier chatbots or the earlier IVR systems that still apply very much to these new systems. And also, it's a really hard problem. I mean, I think some of these things like Google Home and Amazon Echo and Siri are so focused on getting that task correct. Like, I'm going to get her the calendar appointment, I'm going to get her directions, I'm going to turn on the light, that they didn't spend the time to say, well, what's going to happen next? And I think that's starting to shift a bit. I see this especially with Google. They're starting to be able to handle things like pronouns in the following question. So there are some improvements. So I think people are realizing that we can do more and are spending more resources on it.
So I have two questions.
Yeah.
So the first one I think is short. I don't know if you know Bitext, BITEXT.com. So it's a company that generates many possible phrases. You give it a sentence, like before you were talking about needing to enumerate all the different ways somebody could say it. So I was wondering if you knew of them and what you thought of them. And the second question is, I was wondering what you think of Sherry Turkle's critique of conversations with robots that are performing empathy.
Yeah. So on the first one, I haven't heard of that system, but one thing I've used in the past are things like Mechanical Turk, where I will pose the question and try to collect as much data as I can. Often it's typed data, but that's still a good start. I was reading this article by Sherry Turkle where she was talking about watching an older woman talk to a robot, and she was telling the robot this really sad story about her son's death. And Sherry Turkle called it something like disgusting. And I was so torn, because I kind of see where she's coming from. But in my line of work, like at Sensely, where I watch patients interact with their avatar, they all know it's an avatar. They're not thinking it's a person. But some of them get attached to the avatar, and they open up a bit to her, even though it's a very straightforward check-in. I think that we can do some good with these kinds of things. I think we can help people feel potentially a little less lonely. Obviously, it'd be better if a person could come over and sit down and chat with them, and we shouldn't replace that human connection. But I think these systems can serve a certain role to help people, people with memory loss. Spouses are under terrible stress if they have like a spouse with Parkinson's or something, and they're having to be the bad guy and remind their spouse to take their medicine over and over again. Or they get so upset when their spouse asks again, like, what's our grandchild's name, things like that. Wouldn't it be better to let a system like Molly or Amazon Echo answer those questions, relieve the caregiver, let the caregiver focus on the other parts of things? And so I think there's a place for it.
What's the most exciting part about voice user interfaces for you?
Oh, I don't know. I really have to say, when the Amazon Echo first came out and I saw the commercial, I was like, who would buy this creepy thing? And then I got one for research for the book, and my whole family loves it. And one of the stories I like to tell is we were calling my dad to wish him a happy birthday, and my husband was like, let's get Alexa to sing. And she sang happy birthday with the three of us as we, as we sang to my dad. I was like, this is fun. And the other thing I really like about things like Echo and Home are that when I'm having dinner with my family, we don't have devices at the table. But sometimes we have a question, like, who's the richest woman in the world or whatever. And I can turn and ask Echo. And the thing is, everybody hears me ask that question. I'm not in my phone, like, typing, like, lost, right? When you're in your phone, you might think you're only taking a couple seconds, but you've left the conversation. Amazon Echo is more like a conversational partner. She joins our dinner conversation, answers a question, and then goes away. And I'm excited about that because it adds something without drawing people away from the experience.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Worth. I'm from Worthwhile Research and Consulting. And I'm really interested in finding out what you're thinking about in terms of expanding context. So you were talking about very pragmatic context, like antecedents, Gricean maxims and stuff. But I'm coming at this from a more linguistic anthropology perspective and thinking about, in particular, gendered interactions, in particular with Alexa and the choice to give it a female name and all kinds of ways. And I'm thinking about prompts to interrupt things. And I'm just wondering what you're thinking about that kind of context, more in terms of sociolinguistic variation or...
Yeah, I wish I could say I'd thought more about it. I have thought a lot about the fact that almost all assistants are female. That definitely disturbs me. You know, this idea that to make something caring and empathetic and soft, it has to be female. So, but in terms of more like the user's input, one thing, this isn't quite what you're saying, but people talk a lot about children in these devices, and there's been people upset like, my child orders my Amazon Echo around. They're not going to understand manners. And I don't agree with that. My son knows perfectly well how to talk to my Amazon Echo versus when he talks to me. You know, it's not hard. But I think you raised a really interesting point. Like, are there other interactions or patterns that we need to be thinking about when we build these systems? And it's not, I'd like to hear more about what you have to think about it.
Yeah, we follow each other on Twitter, apparently. Okay. So I'm gonna talk to you
later.
Yeah,
DM me.
Yes. I think kind of underlying your presentation lies the fact that the hardest part about all this is the dialogue management and maintaining context and hooking into the back-end AI. And so that's a fun problem to work on. I think many people in the room probably are trying to develop their own dialogue managers. But the frustrating thing is, where do you go to find examples of a good and an interesting conversational agent, a system? You know, I have a Google Home, I have an Echo, I have a Jibo, and they're all incredibly...
You have a Jibo? How'd you get one?
I'm an early developer. I can tell you the story.
All right.
I have a YouTube channel. You can see some of my conversations with Jibo on YouTube. What's frustrating is they're all incredibly lame, and so I'm wondering, where do you go to find an interesting conversational agent to show off the best that can be done that's the closest to what you're showing? Are there any demos available that you even know of or anything?
I'm still struggling with that myself because people ask me a lot, like, what's your favorite skill or what's your favorite, and I'll be like, oh, my favorite skill is the meow meow skill, where you say meow meow and it just starts saying cat noises, which my cat confuses my cat. But for these longer ones, there's things like Jeopardy, which some people will say, oh, that's a long conversation. But it's not. It's the same thing repeated over and over again, just like pick one of these options. One interesting thing that I haven't spent too much time on, but Amazon Echo did hold a contest, the Alexa championships, and they said, oh, people talk to this for 20 minutes. I started talking to it. It goes immediately into gaming and stuff like that. I've been experimenting a bit, not with voice, but with two text chatbots that have intrigued me recently and I feel like are a little better than what I've been seeing in the past, are Woebot, which is supposed to help people with depression and anxiety using cognitive behavioral therapy. It's still got a long way to go, but I think it does an interesting job with some of the conversation handling. Like, for example, it'll say, how are you? And I'll say, fine. And it'll say, fine means different things to different people. Do you mean good fine? But so there's a few things I like. The other one is one called Replica. I don't know if people here have heard of this, but there's a woman whose name slips my mind, but she created a text chat bot based on her dead best friend's text chat conversations. And she asked all his family and friends to contribute their text chats with this guy. And she built a bot. And she sent it out there to the friends and family and said, you can sort of talk to him. And it was interesting, the reaction she got. Some people loved it. They're like, it's like he's kind of back and I can talk to him. And some people were like, this is horrible, I hate it. But she has made a company and a new thing called Replica where you can start training up a bot and it asks you questions and it remembers things. I've been intrigued by that one too. It's got its own problems. It often leaves me hanging about what to say next. It changes the subject a lot. But those are two, Wobot and Replica, that I've been most sort of interested in as far as conversational ability lately.
My name is Alka. I'm with AT&T.
Where am I looking?
I'm right
there.
here.
Okay.
Really interesting conversations. I have a 5-year-old who says she asks her mom and dad questions, and when they can't answer, she goes to Google.
Yep.
And sometimes I resent Google for knowing more than I know. But I do think about those questions about gender. You know, Alexa and Google, obviously it's called Google, but it's still a female voice. Yeah. And the way they answer the questions, because when, you know, she is going to them to ask for definition of a name or something like that, and the cultural context around it, and languages and all of those. So I'm really glad that there are people, that you're out there trolling people. That's great. The other thing, I had a chance to talk to one of the Jibo's designers, and they actually did, they wanted to make sure people didn't confuse Jibo with actual person or attachment. That's why they have it look like the way it does. And it is, in a way, I wouldn't say dumbed down, but it is meant to say, I'm only, you know, a robot, or not answer things, or not say things a particular way, or be that interesting, so you wouldn't confuse it for something it wasn't designed to be. My question is really separate. I'm taking a is really, I wanted to shift the conversation to ask you about machines talking to machines, which in your video, you know, you had Alexa go with Google. But my question is more about, I'm thinking about, you know, how voice is going to be like the touch screen of IoTs. So when I walk by my refrigerator or walk by another device or anything, I just say, it's so hot, it's cold. You know, like I just react and it says, oh, how, you know, do you want me to do this? Do you want me to do that? And then I was envisioning it that way, and then I'm wondering about this assistant. And does Alexa now speak for me? Does Google speak for me? Does something in my device speaks for me? Does my jaw speak for me as I pass these IoT devices that are then speaking to it or me? You know, have you thought about that inter-machine, and then, you know, where do I fit in, and with the hierarchy of decision making?
Yeah. First, I want to go back to the thing about Jibo. I'm fascinated by Jibo. There's been some research showing that when robots make mistakes, people actually, they're more endearing to the person. So if Jibo's trying to have people be less attached by sort of dumbing down the robot, I don't know that that's going to be a good strategy. Even there's a company called Catalia Health, which has it does a little bit of what we do with chronic care patients, but it has a little robot that doesn't move, just the eyes move, and it holds an iPad. And they're talking about how people dress it up and get very attached to it. So I think people will, I mean, there was a pet rock. People will get attached to anything. So I think it's difficult to
Well, I just want to make sure, because I'm not the designer, so I wouldn't, maybe dumbing down is not the right thing. They're trying to say, what do I know, I'm a robot. You know, they're trying to make it more humble.
Sure, which I think is good. In terms of, if I understand where you're going with like the Internet of Things and things, I hear a lot of people talk about like, is there going to be one Uber assistant that, you know, you're talking to all the time and that interacts with all these other assistants, or how's it going to work? I think, I mean, I certainly don't know. I think it's a very open question right now. In 10 years, am I still going to have an Amazon Echo, a Google Home, a Fire TV, you know, all these different things? I hope not. I hope that I have one thing that I could speak to. Now, what's the underlying thing? Am I having all these different devices who talk to each other? I don't know. You know, there was recently the partnership between Amazon Echo and Cortana, and at first I was like, what? You know, why is that necessary? But maybe Cortana, for example, Alexa's not great right now at calendar stuff, and Cortana is good at calendar stuff. So that joining maybe is a good thing. So it's something we're going to have to work out one way or the other. I don't know where it's going to go.
Those of us in this room would probably have a lot more patience with an AI tool failing than the general public would. If an AI tool, voice or not, was right 99% of the time, people would probably have high confidence in it. If it's right 1% of the time, probably no confidence in it. Somewhere in between, there's a threshold. Do you have any kind of rule of thumb of how often it needs to be right in order for people to have enough confidence in it to not just dump it?
I don't have an exact answer, but a few things I will say. So for example, there are numbers published for Google that say their speech recognition is like 95% accurate or 97% accurate. There's Microsoft reduced the word error rate to 98% accurate, which is great, but still frustrating. So even that tiny amount of failure can really bother people. So my philosophy is we're maybe never going to get to 100%. Humans are certainly not at 100% recognition accuracy. So I think a lot about what do we do when it doesn't work? Because the thing is, if you fail gracefully, I remember at my previous startup, we had this interactive iPad app where we had recorded people, and you could have like a choose your own adventure where you had a conversation with this recorded video. And we found that if we failed gracefully, sometimes afterwards in user testing, I'd say, well, what did you think when that error happened? And they'd be like, what error? Because like one example, we had one that had a comedian, and when it failed to understand what you said, we switched to a little video of the comedian holding his phone, and then he looks up and he goes, oh, my bad, I was texting. And it was like, yes, it was an error, but people kind of chuckled and they repeated themselves and moved on. So I think you can adjust the tolerance a bit, not by striving for this perfect system. Obviously, if it fails a lot, that's going to be super frustrating. But given our current failure rates, you just have to know that it is going to fail. What are you going to do with your user when it fails? With our app, for example, sometimes if it's like a really noisy environment and people are getting nowhere with speech, we'll back off to menus. We don't want to fail the user just because they're sitting next to a fountain that's burbling and interfering with the speech recognition. So yeah, graceful failure, that's my motto.
So I had a question about non-word things in the speech interfaces. I have two examples in mind. One, you had said, like you have a list of things and the person says something that's not on the list, and you were saying sort of silence, like what have you thought about going or something like that as one example of non-word responses that we run into on a daily basis. Are they appropriate in this? The other example in my mind is I often wish that the things in the GPS systems in cars that say turn left in 50 feet, if they could be listening to the environment, and if there's a conversation, go turn left in 50 feet. Do these kind of non-word things have a place in these interfaces?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I haven't tried or heard of sort of the for the sort of the active listening thing, and I'm not sure how that would go. It'd be interesting. It'd be difficult to time it. I'm intrigued by the idea of the GPS clearing its throat. I think that's kind of neat, or at least like turning down the volume or something like that. One thing it did make me think of that's a little bit different is something that we do as humans all the time is we interrupt, but we're not interrupting. So we do this like when someone else is talking. We do that all the time, and it's letting the other person know I'm listening. But the other person doesn't stop and say, what? What'd you say? They understand that. And that's something machines can't do right now. And I think it would add to the conversation to have those little like I'm listening to you, whether it's allowing me, the person, to do it, or whether the computer is doing it itself.
Hi, I think I'm next. So my question actually dovetails nicely off of his question. So with regard to sort of the huge communicative system that we have going on, there's so many contextualization cues. Like throughout your talk, I was voraciously sort of like back channeling and head nodding. And when you were talking about the virtual nurse, you said, maybe there's some facial aspects of the virtual nurse that we can interpret as humans. Do you ever think it will become bidirectional, maybe via computer vision, something like that, where the cues that we as users are giving off to these interfaces will then, is that the future perhaps?
For sure. So there's companies like Affectiva who are doing that right now. One of their use cases that's actually out there is that they will have people watch movie trailers, and they'll be watching the face, and they'll be like, oh, people laughed, or people smiled, or people enjoyed this part of the movie trailer. Now they're trying to apply it to other things. And so that's what people want to do. Again, personally, I think we're still a ways out from doing it successfully, but absolutely, a goal of ours would be if we can see that a patient is under a lot of distress, I would like to be able to let their clinician know, like, you might want to give them a call today. Their blood pressure was fine. They didn't have a rapid weight gain. But something seems a little off, can you check in with them? And that kind of thing. Again, not name like they are 3.7% angry today, but just say they seemed, their baseline, they were higher than their baseline, might want to check it out. So it's definitely coming. I don't know how long it's going to take, but yeah.
Okay, we'll be excited.
Waiting on our bated breath. We have one back up here. Hi, thank you. I was curious about, I think you're working with the NHS in the UK. Sorry, back here.
Yeah, I know, it's hard for me, like localized stuff.
Working with the NHS in the UK, and I was curious about your experience, both if there are any cultural differences, and also how you're handling all the dialects. I mean, obviously there's a ton of languages too, that's a separate issue, but the dialects alone, even it's just say English language or the dialects, and also any cultural differences with working in the UK.
For sure, and I'm married to a Brit, so I thought I had a good handle on some of these language cultural differences, but I found when I was using some of the standard things I would use in my American conversations, like I do a lot of encouragement, like good job, nice work. When I put those in the British ones, I got a lot of blowback, like, no, you don't want to tone it down. Like, we're not going to tell people they're doing a great job. So certainly that kind of stuff. As far as dialects, so there's sort of two parts to that. One part is just the speech recognition itself. And we use both Google and Nuance, and we rely on their data sets to be able to, so we have, for example, a UK English versus a US English versus Australian English. So, but within the UK English, there are certainly dialects that Google doesn't have enough data for, so they're harder to be recognized. That's definitely part of it. The other part, of course, is just the terminology. So in particular areas, you know, abdominal pain might be expressed in a whole variety of ways. And so that's part of, on our side, on the natural language processing, we need to be seeing what are the other variations people say in that area, add those to the system so that if the recognition handles it correctly, we can handle it on the understanding side. So definitely a consideration even in English.
Michael, is this the last one? Okay, so I'm going to turn this back over to our friend in the front row, and this is the last question, but that doesn't mean you have to leave immediately. Kathy's willing to stick around for a little bit and chat. People who are wearing green buttons and red buttons, you can meet each other. I'm looking for opportunities. I have jobs to give out. So please continue your conversation.
Hi, two quick comments and then a question. So as far as the failing gracefully, going back to that, there's data that shows that when companies solve customer problems, the customers like the companies better. So that might have interesting implications for the failing gracefully thing.
Yeah.
Second comment is, as far as the emotion, the question that she asked, there is a Watson demo of a nutrition counselor that uses the emotion of your speech to text, you know, because it interprets that text, right? To, like, for instance, if you say, "Oh yeah, I had a donut," then it'll go, "Well, that's okay once in a while, you know, but you should go back." But if you say, "Oh, and I ate a donut," then it will go, "Oh, don't worry about it, it's okay," you know. You know, so there already somebody's got a demo that's doing that, and developed by an IBM person. So the question is, we're talking about like an agent that sort of supersedes or supervises all these different applications and whatnot. It seems to me that a critical thing here, and in so many other of the apps that we use, Amazon, Google, et cetera, trust is a key factor. And it's incredibly important, and I don't see too many people talking about it too much. So I was wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, so the first thing you said reminded me of something else that's a really good practice when you're designing these systems is to acknowledge the user even if you can't solve their problem. Like an example I give is if you've built a bot that does hotel booking and you see a bunch of users saying, "I want to rent a car." Don't say, "I don't understand." What would a concierge or a human do? They'd say, "You want to rent a car? I'm sorry, I can't help you with that, but I can book you a hotel room." Same thing applies in these voice systems. Thinking about good customer service agents and people. What do people like when you're telling someone a problem? What do you want? You want to be heard. You want to be acknowledged. What is the problem you're having? Did the person understand you? So our voice systems can do something like that too. So good point about the customer satisfaction. As far as the last question, which has to do with trust. So I think there's different elements to that. I know a lot of people were freaked out when Amazon Echo and Google Home came out there, and they're like, "I don't want something listening to me all the time." I installed one in our office, and one of my office mates was like, "Oh, I don't want this." But now he's happily playing Jeopardy every day. So it's a really valid concern, and I think if you're in the space, you need to be really careful with people's trust. You need to do things like we have to collect the audio of what people are saying and the transcription, but it should be anonymized. The user should be aware of it and be able to erase it, like they can do on Amazon Echo. They can erase your recordings. You can take them out of Amazon. They also get rid of them after a few months. Amazon Echo and Google Home make it very clear when they're listening. You can't listen without the light bar being on. Now, maybe somebody eventually could hack that, but the point is, it's not surreptitiously listening to you. The wake word is local. It's not sending everything you say to the cloud. And we need to keep strong to those principles, because as soon as somebody breaks them, I was just listening to this podcast, Reply All, all these people are convinced that Facebook is listening to them all the time because it's showing ads about things they were talking about. It's not, but the coincidence makes you think it is, and it's breaking people's trust. So we have to be really, really careful and good stewards of people's data and make sure that we keep that trust and maintain it.
All right, thank you all for coming, and hope we see you next month.